Greetings and salutations, travelers. Welcome back to the Inn of Planar Crossroads, and as always, welcome back to our Around the Hearth discussions. This time, we are starting our Sci-Fi July discussions, and that means that we've got a kind of not exactly fresh crop. We've got a nice, robust crop of content creators this time to talk about the different things that we're going to talk about for Sci-Fi July. Specifically this time we're going into sci-fantasy, sci-fi versus sci-fantasy. Not like which one's better, but more which one are you leaning towards in your game. So that's what we're going to go for this time. There may be some opinions voiced about which one is better. That's not, specifically a requirement, but we're going to get into that. First, we've got to do the introductions really quickly. I'll start us off. Then we'll go Josh, Dan, Wesley, Compass, Scrat, and then Levi will have his quick spotlight because we got to be quick this time. So, I'm Adam L. Spain with the Inn of Planar Crossroads. We are discussing, like I said, that Sci-Fi July stuff, but I did want to do kind of a preface. We're not going to specifically cover things just about cyberpunk and stuff, because preview for upcoming in September, which is going to be Punk Timber, we're going to talk about various types of punk, which will obviously include cyberpunk that time. So this is going to be a general discussion about sci-fi, and we hope you enjoy that. We did just get the I did work on the web page today as of recording, and it should have at least image buttons that you can click to get to our various places. I'm still working on getting it to look pretty and nice in the way I want it to, but that's what we've got for now as far as announcements. So what do you got, Josh?
Hey, I'm Josh from Copper Dragon Games, and that's my intro. That was my intro in, Warp 10, so super fast.
Boom.
All right.
Mic drop.
There it is.
Yeah. No, I gotta do post work.
I'm just joking. You don't have to put it in post.
No, it's too late now. You can't say that, and then, no. Viewers, they're gonna think it's lazy.
Josh had this fast intro, and then we derailed it instantly.
All right.
Then it got 6 times as long.
What you doing, Dan?
Hello, it's Dan from Avenue Studios, and of course, with this collaboration, you can find us on YouTube, Rumble, and Podcast. We do live streams on Wednesday night, where specifically with this collaboration, we build a one-shot and play test it based on some of the concepts we talk about here on Adam's channel. So hopefully, you'll hop over to our channel and bounce back and forth to see what we create based on these awesome discussions. So hope to see you there. I'm very excited, of course, to have my good friend and supporter, Mr. Moral Compass, with me. So he will be actually running the actual play that we build and test on the stream. So I'm quite excited for that one. So that's us.
All right, Wesley.
Hi, I'm Wes Allen from dmtales.com. You can find me also on YouTube at dmtales TTRPG. And there you go.
Oh, another mic drop. Gotta edit that in.
Yes.
All right. Compass, you got anything you want to say in this intro?
Other than you could find me on Avenue Studios, where Dan and I are in a team together called After Class, where we play with our beautiful wives, and you should check it out.
100.
All right. And then Scrat or Squirrel, what you got?
That's me. That's Scrat from A Squirrel Plays over on YouTube, where we talk about world building, character building, story building, all that good stuff. Whether that's TTRPGs or the world's next bestseller or your movie script, whatever, your creative endeavor, that's what we get into. And that's it. You can just find some stock footage of a squirrel dropping a peanut or something.
Squirrel. Just making this work now. Come on. All right. Well, we keep calling him Scrat. He's technically a published author, but we keep calling him Scrat anyway. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right. And that means we're done with that because we're trying to be real quick. So what you got, Levi, for our very quick spotlight?
A YouTube channel, Okayest DM. Basically a channel discussing TTRPG things. More of a focus on 5e at the moment, but has discussed new systems and more general topics. Displays what's important, and then just kind of talks to you about it.
Yeah.
Can I tack something onto that?
Sure.
Okay, because he's in my server. He's been hanging around. He's been having a huge focus on making his own game system called...
Oh, is that the Sagas
Sagas,
official announcement?
Yep, and
Okay.
that's coming soon. I forgot the date, but I think it's within the next couple months, because he was just roping in a lot of people for testing, so...
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had not yet watched that one video, so that was useful context.
Awesome.
Yep. I think it says any setting, any genre, any story, and you can try it out. So there you go.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's a genreless. Ooh,
Yeah, the system
okay.
agnostic something is what it stands for.
Oh.
It's right on his homepage too. I just pulled it up. So
Oh,
First thing
share
it
the
is-
link in the chat. I want to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm on like a genreless reviewing kick lately, so I really want to check that out.
Huh? Cool
Oh.
beans. See, this is why we do it, people. We discuss, we interlock and interweave various information to better understand what's going on around us. All right, that's our shout out. We got to get on this because we got peeps in here that need to be talking about sci-fi stuff. So, sit down by the fire if you choose to. Pull up a chair by the hearth and join us as we discuss, with our favorite beverages, sci-fi, specifically sci-fi versus sci-fantasy, and understanding the difference between the two. All right. So, skål.
Okay, naše družbe.
Madrug, moj drug.
Da. Ja lublю tebe.
All right. So,
What just happened?
bunch of Russian
Just
stuff.
some bro Russian love.
All right. Sci-fi versus sci-fantasy. I'm going to start us off so you guys can organize your thoughts. Like I said, it's not specifically cyberpunk this month, but cyberpunk falls into that, so there are some themes I'm sure will pop up. Sci-fi versus sci-fantasy. I think there's a couple things you want to consider, and one of the best indicators of which one you're going to be having going on in your game is whether you're playing a what people call hard or soft sci-fi, because that will really start to influence whether you're going to be being very realistic with the technology that you're looking at here. So, what do you guys think about that difference between sci-fi versus sci-fantasy, maybe incorporating that understanding of hard versus soft sci-fi and how it relates?
So a starting point that will be the deciding factor for a lot of people is just aesthetic and normal narrative themes. We get into its quote comes up a lot, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So in many ways, if you really wanted, you could do a lot of the same stuff either way, but it'll feel different. The questions that are like more natural to ask in your game are different. If we want to get into like hard and soft sci-fi, it I think works similarly to the question of hard versus soft fantasy, where it's like, so hard versus soft fantasy is more how much do you understand the rules and how does it work, where hard versus soft sci-fi is more, is it explained and is it consistent? I know those are really close. No, I was right at first. I agree with my initial self more than my current self. I started disagreeing with myself, and I'm like, no, I was right. It's cool. Anyway.
What?
That was the
Father was
interesting
wrong
thing
once.
when I saw the science fiction versus science fantasy. I immediately went back to the 80s hearing. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that, like what you just said, the aesthetic. I mean, you can do so much. Like Babylon 5 is a hard science fiction show, but they have techno mages, which are saying, oh no, we're just doing this for technology, but we're making it look like magic. So they did that. Whereas opposed to get to Star Wars, where we literally call Jedi space wizards, right? So that's like there's a general difference in aesthetic between the two. So I think, Levi, you nailed it, and you shouldn't have disagreed with yourself. You got it right the first time.
Well, and that's why I came back. I'm like, no, How can you know for sure you're right if you're not willing to consider if you're wrong?
I will. I'll grant you that.
Fair.
Yes,
That's fair.
very fair. But I'll affirm you were right the first time.
Yeah.
And I haven't been wrong yet.
Nice.
So, wait. No.
Tonight.
Tonight, yes. This hour.
There you go.
So,
Yeah, I wonder too, with that, I love that clarification. The first thing that popped in my mind, and tell me what you guys, especially for you guys that have more plethora of experience with other systems, is there may be a factor in what system you choose to play in may skew you one direction or another. Because my inclination would be those more open systems that are more heroic play. My inclination would be that would start to tend towards sci-fi fantasy versus harder, more crunchy systems. At the least would lend themselves better to a strict hard sci-fi where you're trying as best to follow the known laws, but feel free to disagree.
I slightly disagree because we get into a relatively more set in stone system of Starfinder, but that is a built intentionally from the ground up, a sci-fi fantasy.
Fantasy, right.
So it is like built in that there are hard mechanics for how both of those are working together, even though it is a crunchier, more specific setting system. But when personally running a game in like setting agnostic systems, I am often really willing to bend some world building around for someone if there is a feel that they would love to go for. So as a relatively permissive GM, in all honesty, I am more likely when running a setting agnostic system for it to drift like that, in part because as I'm improving, it's fun to throw magic in, or maybe one person would like to have some magic other stuff, than if I was playing like a cyberpunk system that is a strictly sci-fi.
okay.
But if you are a GM who is playing something setting agnostic, but you have a very specific setting and feel for that, I feel like you are taking every aspect of the mechanics and you are working them in towards your sci-fi understanding of the world. Now, this only really works if you have a strong understanding of your world in these sort of setting agnostic things to be able to compress it into that, let's say. Right? Like, if you want to teleport, it's like, all right, well, either you can do this, or sorry, this sci-fi setting does not have teleportation that doesn't kill you.
It's interesting because you have two things going on. You're talking about system agnostic stuff, which is
setting agnostic.
Setting. Okay, setting agnostic. Okay, so then never mind. My point's
yes.
But you have
There
something
it
that's
is.
more.
There it is. He got to have his one wrong.
I'm wrong. Look at that. I get an experience point.
Yeah.
That's one though.
But you have these two concepts. Like, one is just the narrative you're driving, right? Inside the in-world narrative, as all the players gather around the table and things come together. That can be. It depends really on what you're trying to tell together to be hard science fiction or science fantasy. Whereas you have systems that it's designed from the ground up. This is going to be hard science fiction or science fantasy. Like Gamma World is science fantasy. Like that's like the original science fantasy role-playing game. Numenera is kind of science fantasy, whereas you have games like The Expanse or Coriolis: The Third Horizon. They're built from the ground up. So there's like two ways that you can arrive at what type of game you're playing. And homebrewers get the best of both worlds because they get to decide. So homebrewers are always best. I just put that out there.
There's those systems. There's also Traveler, I believe, is built very much like a sci-fi rather than a sci-fantasy type of system.
That's a hard science fiction. Yeah, it really is. Yep. So I like that there's different ways to get there. You don't have to pick one way.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that we can do.
I misheard, I went back.
Yeah. There's a lot of things we can do as, even with today's current technology, that we just don't because of, different economic, political reasons and stuff. When you look at, watch some of Isaac Arthur Sci-Fi discussions, I think it's what it's called. But Isaac Arthur on YouTube, he does a lot of discussions on, he does like weekly videos on the current state of technology and theoretical things we could do and stuff like that and all those type of things. But he bases it off of known physics, and the known things that we can do. We could already build moon bases. We could already simulate gravity enough to have not lose our bone density when we went up into space, but we'd have to do those things. And we could have travel into space right now, back and forth travel, going up and down right now with current technology. Nothing new has to be invented. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do. You don't have to feel, I'm saying this because you don't have to feel like sci-fi is somehow going to keep you from telling cool stories because you can't do X, Y, or Z with it. Well, it just depends on what you're doing and what type of story you're telling. Because, let's see. Yeah, I think several of us would enjoy the story of Independence Day. It's sci-fi. It even has aliens and stuff. But it's a sci-fi adventure that you could run in a system like, could be easily run in Starfinder or something like that. You just don't have a whole bunch of races. Everybody plays a human and you're fighting against the aliens and you get some alien tech, and then that allows you to do that thing. It's very not scientific, but it still it still leans more towards sci-fi versus sci-fantasy, in my opinion. Because it doesn't have a lot of crazy tech. It's just like, force fields and interstellar travel. I mean, interstellar travel is really fantasy, but that's kind of the buy-in. It doesn't feel like it, and that's what you're going for.
We know how the physics of it work, right? When it comes to Independence Day, I always go back to Harlan Ellison's comment on it was, and this is the 1990s, Macs, which don't interface with any earthly computer, will interface fine with alien technology. I mean, that's science fantasy right there. And 90s Max networking stack. So
they picked that time to open the walled garden.
It was absolutely amazing.
Well, they just didn't know how to close it from the aliens.
Right. The aliens had no idea. I mean, they'd never seen it before. It was, what do you know? So they were using Apple Talk. I don't know what.
Hey, I mean, maybe. Big corporation just took over. That's what it was. They made They made the spaceships all the same. That was the problem. There was no open source. Where's the code? No.
And now we're at Cyberpunk. Those corpos.
we were going to get there no matter what, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Steer in early.
In this discussion, I think I have come to at least one thing that would put a stronger barrier line between just science fiction and science fantasy, is that the world before the technology was advanced like the history of your setting, whatever setting you're doing, is going to feel appreciably different if magic existed before the technology caught up than a world where there was no magic before that. So, like, in a harder sci-fi, the history pre-existing levels of tech would feel closer, and like the cultures would progress more similarly to what we know and understand than maybe a world that had magic for longer in addition to it.
I don't know if I agree with that, because Gamma World is Gonzo. And it's like, we're not basing this, like, you're a mutated rabbit. How? We don't know. But you have mutant abilities now that let you shoot lasers out of your eyes. And then, like, Numenera is just so far in advance, like, there's just so much leftover technology that normal people can't differentiate it from magic. We go back to the and then worlds without numbers the same way, because they recognize, the wizards are recognizing that they're accessing magic, but it's based on technology from the previous world. So it wasn't like, that might be the one that's the gray area, but there's I don't know if that's as hard a line as it is.
That's fair. I think it might apply more to near sci-fi than to sci-fi as a total genre.
Sure.
Now,
honestly, I was trying to find a distinction, because in many ways it is almost entirely aesthetic, and I was trying to find one more solid.
It depends on that.
There might not be one.
It is interesting, like the way you approach the introduction to sci-fi elements. Like, you can have everything from Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, where you've got like your wizards and warriors exploring a crash space stuff, all the way up to, Iron Man and Doctor Strange being on the set at the same time, and then on to like Star Wars, like far future. Like, there's so and I can see where the history of the setting and where you are in the progression, where your characters are meeting those sci-fi elements or interacting with those sci-fi elements could make a difference. It may not be the deciding factor, but at least have a big impact.
I think it may be very much an aesthetic choice as to what the differentiate and what the line is. I mean, the lines are blurred. We've already figured that out, but it just might be, nope, we're steering this way, and so you're staying on that end of the continuum instead of steering into fantasy. So,
I might offer something to chew on to maybe help us clarify it beyond just aesthetics. It goes to the idea again of hard versus soft. Are you still working within the laws of physics, or are you bending the laws of the universe around you? Because magic is very much something that feels like you're bending the laws around you. Like, Jedi can defy the laws of physics, which makes it very much fantastical and fantasy. Whereas something like a force field is theoretically possible.
Yeah.
So you have this distinction that you can kind of work with when you're working on your settings and when you're working on what type of game you want to run. What do you want to have? Do you want to have tech that is going to bend the laws of physics? Or do you want to have, and the laws of the universe around you? Is your tech going to work within the laws of the universe around it?
I think you can look when you kind of approach that decision too, as a narrator, as a storyteller within that game. It kind of comes down to, for me, it would come down to, how much do I even care to explain over the course of this game? Like, why this laser works versus this firebolt, or from a wizard, or whatever. Like, does it even, like, there are some settings that really get into, like, for example, the Rifts universe has techno wizards, and they really get into some of the nitty gritty of, like, this is a technological device that happens to be powered by magical force that is, like, pulled from a ley line. Like, there is there are some that get into that, and then there's
Yeah.
like, okay, and then there's the Force that is a thing that certain people can do because they can. I don't know. Star Wars probably goes into a lot more detail.
Midi-chlorians.
Elsewhere, but-
Sorry.
No.
Is that what it is? I don't know.
You know,
we don't
that
have
gets
enough time.
Not the Star
That
Wars
gets a
bit.
lot of
Maybe
hate.
that was a bad example.
It gets a lot of hate, but technically it's just a test to indicate whether the Force is highly present in a person, not necessarily that they have more Force than someone else. But it's still
Bite-
not very good at a
Bite my
character. Okay.
They're sorcerers,
Just
not
create
wizards.
this MacGuffin.
All
There
right.
you go. I don't know if this will help or not, because I'm trying to, as you guys are talking about this, I'm trying to think too about, and I've been thinking about this leading up to this discussion too, and I don't have answers, so let's see what you guys can come up with, is what, looking between the two, and I do think it is definitely, we're struggling to find a hard line, but within that spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things within something that's true sci-fi or harder sci-fi is probably better language to the sci-fantasy that would aid a story? What are tropes or narrative structures or any kind of narrative sort of elements that you'd want to look at to see? Because for me, a lot of times I think about what's the story my players and I want to tell, what setting maybe is going to be most beneficial to that. Of course, there's a lot of other factors in what people are interested in, like you're saying, looking at it. But I don't know if that would help in any way or stir up anybody's thoughts on from that angle of what would help you tell the best story that you all of you at the table want to tell. Or inspire it, because of course sometimes we discover the stories as we're playing.
Well, like in science fantasy, a lot of times you're dealing with things. You're dealing with things that we would find common in like a strict fantasy setting, right? The chosen one narrative. That's often a big deal. Like Dune.
Yep.
Dune's science. People will argue about that. Dune's science fantasy. So you see those types of elements that come out. You're dealing with the mystical, like the Jedi,
right?
And again, there's gray areas because you have them in Mari and Babylon 5, and telepaths are running around all over the place. But I think that's something that riffs off of fantasy. Is you're dealing with those very common fantasy tropes. Science fiction, at least for hard science fiction, a lot of times what I see is the driving force behind it would be things, and that goes to like stories like The Expanse, with like politics are very much central. The conflict between different factions and their interactions as they vie for things like resources,
right? Which
exists in fantasy, but it's central in more science fiction games.
Yeah.
And in the
I'm just laughing because it's in Dune too, though.
It's in Dune. It is. Well, I mean,
So
it's
we
all
get that
gray area,
washing.
right? It's
Right,
all
yeah.
It's all there. But I think that's kind of where you see what direction you're taking by looking and to see what those elements are hitting the beats for the storyline.
Right.
And science fiction is harder for me because the engine's broken. Which, Serenity or Firefly had an episode about that, right? But I mean, that's something that's very much like the technology is broken, is very much part of hard science fiction too. Or depletion of resources. We're about to run out of oxygen. Like those are the types of drama that drive science fiction, and it's not the big overarching prophecy type narrative that you see in fantasy.
That's very fair.
To draw everything back in, because we're going to have to get to final thoughts. Is to kind of work with that, you have that grittiness that you're talking about. How gritty do you want to be? How much do you want to explain, to use Josh's type of statement again? If it's, let's say, two different things, you have the same thing, like the mecha, okay? Definitely size something, right? It's science something. So, you have Gundam. That's science fiction. there is Gundanium, and it's kind of, this rare metal thing. But the idea is that it's very grounded. It's not, there's no wizards in it and stuff like that. That's one type of mecha. Then you have Escaflowne. That's magic mecha. That's what they are.
What is that?
It's the Legend of Escaflowne. It's a 90s anime.
Escaflowne.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went anime.
It's an anime.
Yep.
I'm
I get
Star
lost
Blazers.
every time we go anime. I'm just
Start
like,
Star Blazers and
glazed
Battletech,
over,
and after that,
no idea what's
Robotech, and I'm
going on.
out.
Okay, so Battletech is definitely sci-fi.
Yes.
Yes.
Macross would kind of tend more towards sci-fantasy.
Yeah, I will definitely go with that.
So there
They
you
had
go.
A city and a ship. Yeah.
So there you go.
So, okay. We're good. I got you.
All right. We got to get to final thoughts. So let's go ahead. We'll start with Josh, and I'll go down and around. So Josh, Dan, Wesley, and then we'll go down some more.
well, the bad thing is I don't know what my final thoughts are.
Mic
Science
drop.
Fantasy's awesome.
There's no
though.
mic drop on that. There's no
I
mic
know.
drop.
The mic dropped on my head. My brain stopped working.
Put that in post.
Yes. No. Science Fantasy's awesome. Like being able to combine elements of these two very disparate genres that I've grown up reading and loving playing games around is really cool. And I love the opportunity to take elements from both and just kind of mix them together in a everything but the kitchen sink kind of setting and play and just have fun in that sandbox. I enjoy those types of settings. And I'll leave it at that.
What you got, Dan?
I think the last thought that popped in my head as you guys were talking was possibly something, regardless of where on the range you're falling, I think something that really makes it feel sci-fi is that interest in how things work. Because you could make magic feel very techy, like we've been talking about a couple of systems where you're getting to that nitty gritty of this step to this step, which is, kind of mathematical and very logical. Those types of things can at least give you a sci-fi feeling, no matter where you fall in that range. So that could be something, that could be a tool you could pull out in if you enjoy that nitty gritty of, well, okay, Fireball works this way because this, and it only works that way. If you don't do it in that order, that way, it doesn't work. That can start to feel sci-fi-y.
All right.
Tag.
So we'll do Wesley, then Compass, then Levi, then Scrat, then me.
I think my last thoughts are like my first thoughts. I can't necessarily define it, but I know it when I see it. It's just really just where it comes down, because it is such a continuum and a blur that I think the best, unless someone's really on the outlying areas of it, I think the best we can do is this leans toward, and I think that might be the clearest in this ambiguous way. It's the clearest way we can describe it.
I like that a lot. I like that explanation a lot.
Thanks.
Okay,
Take away an
Compass,
experience point.
you've been very quiet, but
All right.
what you got?
So this is what my thoughts are. So I guess for the when it comes to sci-fi versus sci-fantasy, it should be about tone and perspective, especially that of the universe. So for example, if you are in a universe that you're going through it's very high tech, how the universe reacts to something really sets the tone to how the fantasy is incorporated into the universe. So, for example, if you have like Warhammer 40k, where if you come across the warp, your dreams are shattered, and everything like that, it is a fantasy in the negative aspect. Where if you could have something, I have no examples of, but if you have any sort of like divine type thing into your sci-fi universe, it could be awe-inspiring or other things like that. So I think it depends on how your universe interacts with the fantasy aspect. If there is any, kind of determines how it is. If there's not much of reaction, it's high fantasy, where a low reaction has a much greater impact on the setting and the people themselves.
That is a really interesting take. I like that too.
I need to go back and watch the episode just so I can chew on it more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, Levi, you're up.
So, just from like a pragmatic world building setting, if you are trying to make your own science fantasy setting, this is less about the verses, but more just a tip. Give your technology and your magic different spheres of influence, so that way they remain feeling different. And so that way people don't actually accidentally mix up the two. Unless you have a very... my laser is powered by, like, the remnants of a lich we found in a tomb a while ago.
Metal.
Mishmash.
Ooh, that laser.
I want to make that now.
Yes.
But the core point of that was more the, like, hey, there is, like, tech-fueled magic and magic-fueled tech. If they're that interlinked, you don't have to worry as much. But, like, just... if you have a world where there is technology and there is fantasy, so you have, like, wizards and, like, Mandalorians... right, and they are not like strictly the same. I know Mandalorian isn't the direct, but like someone with all the tech on. Anyway, core point being, if you give both types of things spheres of influences, it can help distinguish them in your players' heads.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I am now imagining like a Boltar from 40K with an orb casing underneath it where the gun's magazine should go, and it's just got a lich's flaming skull right in there, and it goes.
Ooh,
so
ooh, a demi-lich right there.
Yeah,
it's shattering and like talking about all the people it's happy to kill.
They took it from one of the Necron worlds.
It's talking smack at everybody that it's shooting at. There you go. It's an intelligent item. All right.
I'm definitely throwing a demi-lich at my basic fantasy playing group now.
You're welcome, his group.
They're all gonna die.
All right, what you got, Scrat?
I actually got like a couple questions and then a fun fact. So, I feel like we kind of already covered this. I apologize. I was wrangling a cat there for a few minutes, but
that's tough for a squirrel.
It is. It's a lot bigger than me. I feel like we came to the conclusion that a sci-fantasy can be in a medieval setting. Did we come to that conclusion, or did my...
I don't know.
I don't know if we did.
So let me give you an example then. I will use the universe that I have made. So, several years of world building crammed down into like 5 seconds here. The way it works is all the gods of the planet, they got gods of nature, oceans, and all that, this, that, and the other. All of that, all their power has been funneled down into these crystals that the people of the world can harvest and use, and that drives how everything was built in that world. Like, that is their technology, is using that stuff. So we're talking running water to wash your dishes, all the way up to airships and stuff, but like, that's the technology. Would you consider that science fantasy, or because it's medieval time, does it fall out of the ring?
Well,
Really
there's...
question.
I think you could technically still call it sci-fantasy, because we haven't really said that science has to be one way or the other as a time period.
And I kind of missed a step there. The reason I asked was because before we got started, I had to look up what in the world sci-fantasy was. So, and the
it's
answer
what you
I
did.
got,
It's what you did without knowing.
I think I would have said no, because I kind of defined the science fiction as the introduction. Introduction is so not a word. Introduction.
It is now.
Of like, I guess I'm making up words now. Of technology that we don't have access to, or at least not common access to, in today's world and society. So if it's just like running water that's powered by magic, and on that level, I wouldn't think of that as science fantasy, because the actual technology, the science fiction aspect of it would be... I don't know if this is making sense.
Well,
Like, it caught up. It didn't progress ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
that was... Well, go ahead.
Like if an alien spaceship crashed in that world, and you had aliens and lasers and I don't know, then that that would make sense to me as science fantasy, because then you have technology that's more advanced than modern age.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
But I don't know.
but you could even if you could put like a gun from 21st century, maybe that's where we can send them all. We can gun from the 21st century back in a magic setting. You're kind of hitting science fantasy at that point, right? Because it's not magic, it's not technology that they have, and you're merging the two worlds together. I don't know.
It's an interesting idea. I guess the idea is what the baseline is you're starting with, and then what changes. So we had a similar type of discussion when we were talking about high magic versus low magic, and how ubiquitous is it?
Mm-hmm.
And so if electricity, their aesthetic may be medieval, but their technology is not. Do you see what I mean? The aesthetic may be, they live in castles. Well, so what? This is kind of like Krull when you think about it, because Krull from the movie from the 80s.
The glaive.
Yeah, the glaive that's not actually a glaive. But yeah, the big space rock was actually a spaceship that came down, and it was an intergalactic emperor who sent out his minions and stuff like that and all that. But even on Krull, they were living in castles, but their castles were made of strange materials. They had these magical things, but it was also very much, it looked medieval. It is pulp fiction. It is the classic pulp fiction put into a movie that you see all around. Mm-hmm. So that may be where we kind of get confused, where it can get really fuzzy. So the question is magic performed as a science, or is science just looking like magic?
Mm.
Because in that setting that you're describing, magic is being performed as a science.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas science is not always performed as magic in like a full fantasy setting, a medieval fantasy setting. So I guess that's something to chew on, you guys, because I
get a headache now.
All right, I'm going to go ahead. Did you have anything specific you wanted to make sure to mention, Scrap, before we went on?
The fun fact was, none of this matters because science fantasy technically isn't a category. I had to go look it up at least when you buy an ISBN for your book. I was sitting here thinking, I was like, I do not remember seeing this as a category to label this to. It's not in there. So,
well, I mean, it's science fiction fantasy.
Yeah.
You have to list it as both, right?
Yep.
You got fiction, fantasy, fiction, science, fiction, horror, thrillers. You got a bunch of stuff. I had to go look at it real quick, but
that's interesting because if you go to any bookstore, they merge them. It's science fiction fantasy.
Interesting.
You go to a lot of bookstores.
That the ISBNs don't actually match how the books are sold. That's fascinating to me.
And that kind of leads into my last point. My final thought. The reason we're having so hard a time distinguishing science fiction from science fantasy is because all of our science fiction is based around fantasy. The ideas of what might come to be. the ideas, the fantasies of what those things are. You look at the pulp fiction of the past where the aliens were everywhere on every planet and stuff like that. You look at, even when you look at like the first sci-fi thing ever recorded that we know of, which was actually back in the Roman era, I think, where it talked about the Romans, this Roman adventurer sailed onto a ship into the stars and met these people who had ears for mouth, or, you know, all this weird stuff we would consider very contemporary with odd, weird pulp fiction. And so you see this, and it means that all the fantasy that we have, it doesn't matter if it's the sci-fi that falls away, not the fantasy, because the fantasy remains whether you're high fantasy or low fantasy. It is a fantasy. It is, the sci-fi is when we take real stuff and put it into what we are fantasizing about, what we are imagining. So it all depends on, again, hard or soft, explained or not explained. Is it obeying or bending or breaking the rules? And so you have what level of fantasy you're dealing with. So that's my kind of thought about it. All right.
Drop the mic.
Oh.
He wanted to. Yeah.
There you go.
All right. So that's mine. We've got to get off this time because we are over time for this particular chat. Apologize for those that are watching. We usually try to keep them 30 minutes. This is not 30 minutes. But it was good to get a kind of establishing idea, kind of set up some understanding. Is there anything? I don't think we have any announcements. So we thank you, travelers, for coming by. We thank Josh from Capra Dragon Games. We thank Dan from Avenue Studios, as well as Compass. We thank Wesley from the web DM type of thing, DM Tales, web DM Tales on the web. There we go. My brain. And then my accomplice in crime spotlighter, Levi, and Scrat. Thank you, from A Squirrel Plays. So, thanks to all of them. Thank you, travelers, for watching. And as always, have a great day. God bless and enjoy. Bye.
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 See ya.
This content was made possible by travelers and viewers like you. Thank you.
We went a bit over that time, boys.
It's so good.
Because it was a
though.
nebulous discussion.
It really was. It was harder than I
It's
thought
such a
it would
nebulous. It's a nebulous topic. It
Mhm.
really is.
Yeah, there's so much bleed between the two. Establishing a line is very difficult.
be. Yeah, I guess that's why my final thought just kind of came around to that, because I had made a little note about most of our fiction is actually science fantasy anyway. But then I was thinking about it as we were discussing, and I was like, no, all of the stuff we make up is fantasy, and it's just whether you want it to be magic or science that's doing it. And it's kind of back and forth.
I started to say on there, I can't believe Adam brought us on here to talk for an hour and then tell us what we said didn't matter.
Yeah. That was a mic drop.
All right.
Yeah. Well, but like realistically, like a lot of it was discussing aesthetic and feel and why you would choose
Right.
Mm-hmm.
which version of like interesting fiction that is definitively not even like not trying to be currently realistic.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okie dokie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop this recording and start the next one.
Oh, I had thought you had already stopped it.
Were
Sorry.
we still recording? Whoops.
Bloopers.
Blooper.